It all started with the sunrise. Out on the plains of Texas, the dawn doesn't just arrive, it bleeds across the horizon, slow and red like a fresh wound. For 5 years, Samuel Crawford had watched that same sun come up over an empty life. 5 years since the fire took everything. His wife, his daughter, his soul. But this morning was supposed to be different. This was the morning his new life was set to arrive on a wagon. Her name was Margaret Williams, a woman he knew only from letters, a woman who had agreed to leave the civilized world behind and come be his wife. A woman who was his last desperate gamble against the loneliness that gnawed at his bones. He saw the dust cloud first, a faint puff of red on the long, straight road leading to his ranch. His heart gave a painful lurch. He smoothed down his one good shirt, a shirt he hadn't worn since before the fire. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to look like a man worth crossing a country for. The wagon got closer. The shape of it grew clearer through the shimmering heat. And that's when the first little tremor of wrongness went through him. That wasn't the stagecoach from town. It was just a beat-up farm wagon, and the man holding the reins. That was Pete Morrison, a sour old gossip who wouldn't haul a bag of flour for free unless there was a story in it. Samuel's boots crunched on the dry dirt as he walked to meet them. The hope in his chest was shriveling fast, replaced by a cold dread. "Pete," he called out, forcing a smile that felt like cracking glass. "Where's Miss Williams?" Pete Morrison didn't look at him. He just climbed down from the wagon seat, slow and deliberate, like a man delivering a coffin. His face was grim. His eyes were fixed on the ground. "She ain't coming, Sam." The words hung in the dead morning air. Samuel felt his world tilt. He'd sent her the money. He'd built a whole new room onto the house. He'd pictured her face 1,000 times. "What do you mean she ain't coming?" Pete finally looked up, and his eyes were full of a strange kind of pity. "Got hitched to a banker in St. Louis. Heard he had money, real money." Pete gestured with his thumb toward the back of the wagon, which was covered by a filthy stained canvas. "She sent this instead." Samuel's blood ran cold. Sent what? A package? A letter of apology? It wasn't a package. Pete walked to the back of the wagon, and with one rough tug, he pulled the canvas away. And what was underneath? It broke Samuel's brain. Huddled together like a litter of stray pups were 7 children. 7 scared, silent, filthy children. The oldest was a boy, maybe 12, with eyes that looked 100 years old. The youngest was a little girl, couldn't have been more than 4, with blonde hair so matted with dirt it looked like a tangled bird's nest. They all stared at him, not with curiosity, but with the flat, dead-eyed terror of animals caught in a trap. Their clothes were rags. Their faces were streaked with tears and grime, and every single one of them was bone-thin. Samuel just stood there, the Texas sun beating down on him, his mind a roaring blank. A wife. He was expecting a wife. He had planned for conversations over dinner, for a soft hand to hold in the dark, for the sound of another adult voice in the crushing silence of his life. He had not planned for an orphanage. "What in the goddamn hell is this?" The voice that came out of his throat was a stranger's, a low, dangerous growl he hadn't used since his days in the army. Pete just shrugged, avoiding his gaze again. He held out a crumpled, greasy piece of paper. "Found him at the train station, with this note pinned to the oldest boy's shirt. It's addressed to you." Samuel snatched the note. The handwriting was a frantic, looping scrawl he didn't recognize. It wasn't Margaret's careful, steady script. "Mr. Crawford, you wanted a family. Here is one. They have nobody. Don't look for me. Keep them safe. Their lives depend on it." There was no signature, no explanation, just a command. Keep them safe. He looked from the note to the children. The oldest boy had his arms wrapped around the little blonde girl, his knuckles white. He was daring Samuel with his eyes. "Try something. Just try it." "I can't," Samuel said, the words cracking. "Pete, I can't take 7 children. I don't know the first thing about kids. I've got a ranch to run. I was supposed to get a wife." "Well, they're here now," Pete said, already climbing back onto his wagon. "And whoever sent them paid me double my usual rate to make sure they got here. Said you were the only man for the job." Said you'd know what to do. And with that, Pete slapped the reins, and the wagon rumbled away, leaving Samuel Crawford alone in the dust with 7 broken children and a life that had just exploded into a million unrecognizable pieces. The silence they left behind was louder than any scream. The children didn't move. They just watched him, their eyes wide and dark, waiting for the axe to fall. The little blonde girl let out a single hiccuping sob, a sound so full of misery it felt like a razor blade to Samuel's soul. He looked at their terrified faces. He looked at his empty house, a tomb he'd been living in for 5 years. He thought of the fire, of the ghosts that walked his halls. He was a broken man. How in God's name was he supposed to fix 7 broken children? Then he saw it. Something on the little girl's neck, just below her ear. A dark, ugly mark. He took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. It wasn't dirt. It was a brand, an intricate symbol, like a coiled snake eating its own tail, seared right into her skin. And in that instant, Samuel knew. These weren't just orphans. This wasn't a cruel prank. This was something much, much worse. For 3 hours, they didn't say a word. Samuel led them to the porch, and they sat on the steps in a tight, silent row, like 7 little sparrows on a wire, ready to fly at the slightest sound. He brought them water. They drank it like they hadn't seen water in a week, their eyes darting around, watching every move he made. "What are your names?" he asked, trying to keep his voice gentle. Nothing. Just 7 pairs of eyes staring through him. "Where did you come from?" The oldest boy just tightened his grip on the little girl next to him. Samuel noticed the boy's hands were a mess of scars, old white lines crisscrossing fresh red ones. Defensive wounds. These weren't the scrapes a boy gets from climbing trees. These were the marks of a fighter. Samuel's patience, already worn thin from years of grief, was starting to fray. He had 100 things to do, fences to mend, cattle to check, a life that was already hard enough without adding a silent, human train wreck to it. "Look," he said, his voice harder than he intended, "I can't help you if you don't talk to me. I'm taking you all to the sheriff in town. There's a church orphanage there. They'll know what to do with you." That was the word that did it. Orphanage. "No." The voice was a bare whisper, dry and raspy, from the oldest boy. But it was filled with such raw, primal fear that it stopped Samuel cold. The boy looked up at him, and for the first time, Samuel saw past the defiance. He saw a terror so profound it was chilling. "Please, mister," the boy whispered, his voice trembling, "don't send us back. Not to any official place. They'll find us." The air grew thick. "Who will find you?" The boy's mouth snapped shut. He'd said too much. He looked at the other children, a silent command passing between them. The wall of silence went back up, stronger than before. But it was too late. The boy had given him a piece of the puzzle. They weren't just abandoned. They were fugitives. Samuel looked at them again, really looked this time. He saw the way the second oldest boy, a skinny kid with dark, watchful eyes, kept positioning himself to see both the road and the back of the house. He saw how a girl with 2 long braids flinched when a floorboard creaked inside. They weren't just scared. They were on guard. They were soldiers in a war he couldn't see. Against his better judgment, a judgment that was screaming at him to ride to town and dump this problem on someone else's doorstep, he gestured toward the house. "Inside. You must be hungry." His small 2-bedroom home seemed to shrink the moment they stepped through the door. They didn't explore. They didn't touch anything. They just found the farthest corner of the kitchen and huddled there, a single, multi-limbed creature of fear. As he cooked a simple meal of beans and bacon, his mind was a whirlwind. Who sent them? And why him? The note said, "You wanted a family." But he'd only ever said that in his letters to Margaret. Had she betrayed him this badly? Had she told someone his secret, his deepest, most painful vulnerability? It felt like a violation. The smell of food finally broke the spell. The little blonde girl, the one with the brand on her neck, crept forward. She tugged gently on the hem of his pants. When he looked down, her big blue eyes were filled with tears. She pointed a tiny trembling finger at her mouth, then at her stomach. That at least was a language he understood. He served them plates, and they ate like starving wolves. They didn't use forks. They shoveled food in with their hands, their eyes constantly scanning the room, as if expecting him to snatch the plates away. And as they ate, he saw more. The dark-haired boy had faint, circular scars around his wrists. Rope burns. The girl with the braids had a long, thin scar running down her cheek, poorly healed. "My God," Samuel muttered to himself. "What happened to you?" The oldest boy looked up, his mouth full of beans. His eyes were hard and direct. "Are you going to hurt us?" The question was a physical blow. It knocked the air right out of Samuel's lungs. "No," he said, his voice thick. "Son, I'm not going to hurt you." The boy stared at him for a long moment, then said something that froze the blood in Samuel's veins. The last man said that too. And before Samuel could even begin to process the horror of that statement, he heard it. A sound that didn't belong. A sound that every man on the frontier learned to dread. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, riding hard and fast, coming straight for his ranch. The change in the children was instantaneous and terrifying. One moment they were eating, the next they were on their feet, plates crashing to the floor. The fear in their eyes wasn't the quiet, simmering dread from before. This was sharp, screaming panic. The oldest boy grabbed Samuel's arm, his small hand surprisingly strong. "Hide us," he hissed, his voice desperate. "Please, mister, you have to hide us. If they find us, they'll kill us all." Samuel ran to the window. In the dying light of the afternoon, he saw them. 4 riders, dark silhouettes against the blood-red sky. They were armed with rifles and they moved with a grim, predatory purpose. One of them pointed directly at his house. The hunters had found their prey. Samuel didn't hesitate. His old army instincts took over. He spun around, grabbing the heavy Winchester rifle from its pegs above the fireplace. The cold, familiar weight of it was a grim comfort. "The root cellar," he barked, pointing to a trap door in the corner of the kitchen. "Now! Move!" They scrambled for the door, their bare feet thudding on the wood floor. They moved with a desperate speed that told Samuel this was a drill they had practiced before. As the last child, the little blonde girl, slipped into the darkness, she looked back at him, her eyes pleading. Samuel slammed the heavy door shut, slid a rug over it, and moved a heavy crate of supplies on top of that. It wouldn't hold for long against a determined man, but it might buy them time. The riders were 50 yards out now, pulling their horses to a stop in a cloud of dust. Samuel watched them through the grimy window pane. These weren't cowboys. They weren't lawmen. They were hard men, the kind who live and die by the gun. Their leader, a tall, gaunt man in a black hat, swung down from his horse. He walked toward the porch with an easy, arrogant swagger, like he owned the whole damn world. "Crawford," the man's voice boomed, sharp and cold as a winter wind. "My name's Jessup. I'm here on behalf of my employer, looking for some property that's gone missing." Samuel stepped out onto his porch, the Winchester held loosely in his hands, its barrel pointed at the ground but ready to snap up in a heartbeat. "Don't know anything about any missing property," Samuel said, his voice flat and even. Jessup smiled, but it was a dead thing, a predator's grin that didn't touch his cold, empty eyes. "Oh, I think you do. 7 pieces of property, to be exact. Runaway workers, small ones. They were tracked to a wagon headed in this direction." "Workers?" Samuel's stomach clenched into a knot of ice. The brand on the little girl's neck, the rope burns, the scars. It all clicked into place with a sickening finality. "They're children," Samuel said, the words tasting like poison. "Children old enough to work," Jessup countered, spitting a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "Children who represent a significant financial investment for my employer. Now, we can do this the easy way, Crawford, or we can do this the hard way. It's your choice." The easy way was to give them up, to open that cellar door and hand those 7 broken souls back to the monsters they'd escaped from, to go back to his empty house and his lonely life. The hard way was probably going to get him killed. But as he stood there, feeling the worn stock of the rifle in his hands, he saw the face of his own daughter in the flames. He remembered the promise he'd made to her ghost, that he would never again stand by and watch the innocent suffer. "There are no children here," Samuel lied, his voice like stone. Jessup's smile vanished. He nodded slowly to his men, who began to dismount and spread out, fanning around the house like wolves circling a trapped deer. "That's a shame," Jessup said, his hand drifting down to rest on the butt of the Colt Peacemaker strapped to his hip. "Because my employer, Mr. Ezra Blackwood, he doesn't take kindly to thieves, and he pays me very well to recover what's his." The name hit Samuel like a physical blow. Ezra Blackwood. He wasn't just some rancher. He was a phantom, a whispered legend of a man who ran illegal mining and timber operations across the state. A man whose camps were said to be populated by workers who were never seen again. A man who bought and sold human beings like cattle. 20 years after the Civil War had supposedly ended such things. "They're not property," Samuel said, his knuckles white on the rifle. "They're people." Jessup chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. "They're whatever Mr. Blackwood says they are, and right now he says they're coming with me. Dead or alive. The pay's the same either way." Jessup's hand tightened on his gun. Samuel raised his rifle. "Get off my land." And from the back of the house, from somewhere near the cellar's outer storm doors he'd completely forgotten about, came the one sound he'd been praying not to hear, a child's terrified scream. "Found 'em!" A voice roared from behind the house. "Little rats, we're hiding in a hole." Jessup's dead smile returned, wider and uglier than before. "Well now," he drawled, his eyes glinting with victory. "That settles that, don't it?" The world seemed to slow down. Samuel heard footsteps pounding inside his own house. The kitchen door burst open, and the oldest boy, Tommy, he'd later learn his name was Tommy, stumbled out onto the porch, his face a mask of desperation and fury. "They've got Emma!" he screamed. "They've got the little ones!" Right behind him was one of Jessup's thugs, a big bearded man with a greasy grin. He was dragging the little blonde girl Emma by one tiny arm. She was kicking and crying, a wild, frantic sound of pure terror, but she was no match for him. "Let her go," Samuel snarled. The sound came from deep in his chest, a rumbling growl of a man pushed past his limit. He swung the barrel of the Winchester toward the bearded man. "I don't think so," Jessup said. His own pistol was out now, the black eye of its barrel aimed square at Samuel's heart. "You see, Crawford, you made a mistake. You thought this was a negotiation. You just made this personal. Nobody, and I mean nobody, steals from Ezra Blackwood and lives to brag about it." Samuel looked at the little girl. He saw her tear-streaked face, her eyes wide with a horror no child should ever know. And in that moment, he didn't just see a stranger's kid. He saw his own daughter. He saw the smoke and the flames and the life he'd failed to save. And 5 years of grief, 5 years of loneliness, 5 years of simmering, silent rage finally boiled over. The Winchester bucked against his shoulder before he even consciously decided to fire. The shot was deafening in the sudden stillness. The bearded man holding Emma grunted, a look of shocked surprise on his face as the bullet slammed into his shoulder. He staggered back, his grip loosening. Emma scrambled away, running to Tommy, who pulled her behind the relative safety of a thick porch railing. "Bad choice, Crawford," Jessup bellowed, diving for cover behind a heavy wooden water trough as Samuel jacked another round into the chamber. The air exploded into a nightmare of sound and fury. Splinters of wood flew past Samuel's head as Jessup's other men opened fire. He threw himself behind the same railing as the children, the rough wood scraping his cheek. Bullets thudded into the walls of his house, shattering the windows he'd so carefully installed. He was pinned down, out in the open, with 2 terrified children cowering beside him. "There are 6 more kids in that cellar," Tommy shouted over the roar of the guns. "They'll kill them. They'll drag them out and kill them all." Samuel's mind raced, the battlefield calculations of his past coming back to him in a flash. 4 men. He'd wounded 1. That left 3 effective shooters, including Jessup. They were spread out, giving them flanking angles. He had his rifle, but limited ammunition. This porch was a death trap. "What's your name, boy?" he yelled during a brief pause in the shooting. "It's Tommy." "Tommy, can you shoot?" "Yes, sir," the boy yelled back, his voice tight but steady. They made us hunt our own food at the camps. If we didn't bring anything back, we didn't eat." The casual cruelty of that statement stoked the fire in Samuel's gut. He pulled the heavy Colt pistol from his own belt and slid it across the dusty porch boards to the boy. There's a window on the side of the house just around the corner, Samuel commanded. Get to it. It's got a clear view of the cellar's back entrance. Don't let them get that door open. Don't let them take your family. You understand? Tommy's eyes, old and weary in his young face, met Samuel's. He nodded once, a sharp, determined gesture. He grabbed the pistol with a hand that was surprisingly steady. This boy had been forged in a hell Samuel could barely imagine. Gunfire erupted again. Samuel counted the shots. Jessup's pistol held 6 rounds. He'd fired them all. He was reloading. This was his only chance. With a roar, Samuel burst from behind the railing, charging directly at the water trough. Jessup looked up, his eyes wide with surprise, fumbling with loose cartridges. Samuel didn't fire. He didn't waste the bullet. He swung the Winchester like a club. The heavy stock connected with Jessup's jaw with a sickening crack. The bounty hunter crumpled to the ground, unconscious. One down. But the other 2 were closing in. He heard their boots pounding the dirt. One from the side of the house, one from the front. The man from the side appeared first, his rifle coming up. Crack! The sharp report of Samuel's pistol echoed from the side window. The bounty hunter cried out, stumbling back and clutching a bloody leg. Tommy, the kid was a damn good shot. He hadn't killed the man, but he'd taken him out of the fight. Behind you! Tommy screamed. Samuel spun, bringing his rifle around just as the last man rounded the front corner of the house. They saw each other at the same instant. They both fired. A white-hot poker of pain seared across Samuel's ribs. He felt the impact, felt the blood hot and wet soaking his shirt. But his own shot flew true. The bounty hunter was thrown backward, a dark stain spreading across the center of his chest. He hit the ground and didn't move. Silence. The sudden quiet was ringing, broken only by the groans of the wounded man Tommy had shot. 2 down, 1 wounded. Jessup out cold. But Samuel was bleeding. He pressed a hand to his side, the world swimming in and out of focus, and his rifle was nearly empty. That's when he heard it, the sound that made his blood, already leaking out of him, turn to ice. It wasn't the crying from the cellar, though that was bad enough. It was hoofbeats, again. But this time, it wasn't 4 riders. Through the swirling dust and gunpowder smoke, he saw a whole line of them, coming hard from the east. At least 10 more men. Maybe more. Jessup was stirring. He pushed himself up on one elbow, blood and spit dribbling from his broken jaw. He saw the approaching riders, and a painful, triumphant grin spread across his face. "That'll be Blackwood's regulars," he rasped. "You're a dead man, Crawford. You hear me? Dead. And those children are going back to the mines to be worked until they're nothing but dust." Samuel looked at his own shaking, bloody hands. He looked at Tommy's pale, scared face peeking out from the window. He thought of the 6 other children huddled in the dark earth beneath his feet, their small lives hanging by the thinnest of threads. He was outmanned, outgunned, and bleeding out. The situation wasn't just dire. It was impossible. He had made his stand, and he had failed. But as the thunder of the approaching horses grew louder, shaking the very ground beneath him, he heard another sound, faint at first, but growing clearer. It was high and sharp and utterly impossible. It was the sound of a cavalry bugle. From the north, over a low rise he hadn't even been watching, another group of riders appeared. But these weren't thugs or bounty hunters. They rode in a disciplined column, their blue uniforms stark against the brown landscape. Sunlight glinted off their rifles. It was the United States Cavalry, at least 20 of them, riding at a full charge, straight toward his ranch. Jessup stared, his jaw hanging slack, his triumphant grin replaced by a look of utter disbelief. "What in the hell?" he stammered. The cavalry didn't slow down. They hit Blackwood's arriving men like a tidal wave of blue steel and righteous fury. The fight was brutal, chaotic, and blessedly short. Professional soldiers against a ragtag group of hired killers was no contest at all. Within minutes, the gunfire stopped. The dust began to settle. The field in front of Samuel's house was littered with the bodies of Blackwood's men. The cavalry was rounding up the survivors, their movements efficient and practiced. A captain, a weathered-looking man with sergeant stripes on his sleeve and kind, tired eyes, dismounted and walked toward Samuel. He surveyed the scene. The bodies, the blood, Samuel clutching his side. "You must be Samuel Crawford," the captain said. It wasn't a question. Samuel could only nod, his mind struggling to catch up. How, how did you know?" "We received a telegram yesterday morning," the captain explained. "Said there were some children being delivered to this address. Said you might be needing some help protecting them. Looks like our source was right." "A telegram?" Samuel said, confused. "Who sent it?" Before the captain could answer, Tommy came running out of the house, followed by the rest of the children, who emerged blinking into the late afternoon sun from the cellar. They were terrified, but they were alive. Emma, the little blonde girl, ran straight to Tommy and clung to his leg, her small body trembling. "Are the bad men gone?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Samuel dropped to one knee, ignoring the searing pain in his side. "Yeah, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "They're gone. They're all gone." But his mind was still spinning. A telegram. Someone knew. Someone had orchestrated all of this. They sent the children to him, knowing Blackwood's men would follow, and arranged for the cavalry to be his guardian angels. But who? The captain seemed to read his mind. He pulled a folded piece of paper from inside his coat. This came with the instructions for the telegram. The sender said you'd understand it when you read it. Samuel's hands trembled as he took the paper. It was a letter. The handwriting was neat, feminine, and achingly familiar. His heart hammered against his ribs, which were probably broken. He read the signature at the bottom first, and the world stopped turning. The letter was signed, "With love and respect, Margaret Williams," his bride, his missing bride. What she had written, what she revealed in that letter, didn't just change what he thought he knew, it shattered it. Because Margaret hadn't betrayed him, she hadn't run off with a banker. She had chosen him, not as a husband, but as a soldier. And as he looked down at the letter, he noticed something else. A small, hastily drawn symbol at the bottom, right next to her name. A coiled snake eating its own tail. The same symbol branded on the neck of the child, Emma. This wasn't just about escaped slaves anymore. He was standing in the middle of a conspiracy that was deeper and darker than he could ever have imagined. And the children weren't just random victims. They were the key. Samuel's voice was a ragged whisper as he read Margaret's letter aloud, the words painting a picture of espionage and courage that seemed to belong in a dime novel, not his dusty front yard. "Dear Samuel, by the time you read this, you will understand my deception. I pray you can forgive it. There was no banker in St. Louis. For the past 6 months, I have been working undercover in Ezra Blackwood's organization, posing as a governess. I have been gathering evidence for federal marshals, documenting the horrors of his child slavery ring. But 3 weeks ago, I discovered something that changed the timeline. Blackwood was preparing to ship a new group of children, these 7, to a hidden operation deep in the Colorado mountains. Once there, they would have vanished forever. I could not wait for the slow wheels of justice. I had to get them out, but I could not take them myself. I would have been caught within a day. I needed a sanctuary, a place far from prying eyes. I needed a man who was strong, isolated, and honorable. A man who knew loss and would understand the value of a life. I read your letters, Samuel. I read the heart of a good man who had been hollowed out by grief. I gambled that that man, given a righteous cause, would fight. I sent the children to you. I wired the cavalry from a town 50 miles away, telling them to ride for your ranch if they didn't receive a follow-up, all-clear message from me by noon today. I knew Blackwood's trackers would follow the children's trail. I knew there would be a fight. I am so sorry to have brought this war to your doorstep, but their lives depended on it. These children are the primary evidence against Blackwood. One of them holds a secret that can bring his entire empire down. Give them the family they were stolen from. Keep them safe. Yours in hope, Margaret." Tommy looked up at Samuel, his eyes wide with a dawning comprehension. She saved us. She was the lady who gave us extra bread." "Looks like it, son," Samuel said, his mind reeling. Margaret hadn't used him. She had entrusted him with the most precious cargo in the world. She had seen the broken soldier inside the lonely rancher and called him back to duty. He wasn't betrayed. He was honored. The cavalry captain stepped forward, his expression grim. Miss Williams is one of the bravest women I've ever known. She's been feeding us information for months. But this was a desperate move. Ezra Blackwood is not a man to be trifled with. He has connections everywhere. Judges, sheriffs, even men in my own ranks. He glanced around at his weary soldiers, and for a fleeting moment, Samuel felt a chill of paranoia. Could any of them be Blackwood's men? What happens to the children now? Samuel asked, the question hanging heavy in the air. Legally, the captain said. That's a complicated question. Miss Williams provided documentation proving they were all abducted from various orphanages and family farms over the last few years. They are legally free. But they are also key witnesses in a federal case against a very dangerous man. They need a safe place to go. Somewhere Blackwood won't think to look. 7 pairs of eyes, all fixed on him, waiting. He was just a man with a broken heart and a failing ranch. He had signed up for a wife, for a partner. Not for this, not for a ready-made family of traumatized, hunted children. He thought of the quiet life he had planned, the peaceful evenings, the slow, steady work. All of it was gone, burned away in a single afternoon of gunfire. He looked at Tommy, the boy who had stood and fought beside him. He looked at Emma, who was still clutching Tommy's hand as if it were the only solid thing in the world. He looked at the other 5, their faces smudged with dirt and fear, but with a flicker of hope in their eyes for the first time. Tommy, Samuel said, his voice quiet but clear. What do you want? The boy didn't hesitate. We want to stay together, he said, his voice ringing with a conviction far beyond his years. At the camps, they split up families. They sent brothers one way and sisters another. It was how they controlled us. We made a promise to each other. The 7 of us. We're a family now. We don't get separated again. Ever. All 7 of you? Samuel asked, the weight of the words pressing down on him. Yes, sir, Tommy said. All or none. Samuel looked around his small property. The house was barely big enough for him. The barn needed repairs. He barely grew enough to feed himself, let alone 8 people. It was impossible. It was madness. It would be a life of hardship and struggle and constant, grinding work. And as he watched Tommy gently wipe a tear from Emma's cheek, he realized it was the only thing in the world that made any sense. He had spent 5 years mourning the family he'd lost. Maybe it was time to start building the one he'd found. All right, he said, and the word felt like a key turning in a lock he'd forgotten existed. His voice grew stronger. All right, you can stay. All of you. A collective sigh of relief went through the children. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated hope. But, Samuel continued, holding up a hand, there are going to be rules, a lot of them. This is a working ranch. Everyone works. Everyone helps. You're going to go to school right here. I'll teach you to read, to write, to do sums, and you're going to look out for each other, just like you promised. You're going to be a family. Emma, the little girl with the brand on her neck, let go of Tommy's hand. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, until she was standing right in front of Samuel. She looked up at his tired, bloody, dirt-streaked face, and for the first time since she had arrived, she smiled. It was a small, fragile thing, but it was like watching the sun rise after a long, dark night. Does that mean, she asked, her voice a tiny bell, you're going to be our daddy? The question struck Samuel with more force than the bounty hunter's bullet. He looked down into her innocent, hopeful eyes and felt 5 years of frozen grief finally begin to crack. The pain was immense, but underneath it, something new was flowing in. Something warm. He knelt, wincing as the fire in his side flared. He looked at all 7 of them, his strange, unexpected, impossible family. Yes, sweetheart, he said, the words feeling both foreign and profoundly right. I guess that's exactly what it means. The captain cleared his throat. Mr. Crawford, there's one more thing. The men we have in custody, Jessup and the other survivor, they're talking. They're terrified of Blackwood. They said this wasn't just about recovering property. It was about the girl, Emma. Samuel looked at the little girl, who was now holding his hand. What about her? According to them, the captain said, his voice low, Ezra Blackwood isn't just her master. He's her grandfather. The world tilted again. The brand on her neck. It wasn't the mark of a slave. It was the mark of ownership, a family crest. This entire bloody affair, the tracking, the bounty hunters, the ferocity of the attack. It wasn't business. It was personal. Blackwood wasn't trying to recover a lost worker. He was trying to reclaim his own blood. And Samuel Crawford, a man who had just declared himself her father, was now standing directly in the way of one of the most ruthless and powerful men in Texas. The war hadn't come to his doorstep. His doorstep had just become the front line. The revelation hung in the air, heavier than the gun smoke. Emma wasn't just a runaway. She was royalty in a dark kingdom, the unwilling heir to an evil man's legacy. The brand on her neck was a claim. Her mother, the captain explained, relaying the information they were squeezing out of Jessup, was Blackwood's only child. She ran away from him years ago, horrified by his business. She married a simple farmer and tried to disappear. But Blackwood found them. There was an accident. The parents died and Blackwood took his granddaughter back, intending to raise her as his own. But the girl has her mother's spirit. She resisted. She fought. And then she escaped with the others, thanks to Miss Williams. Samuel looked at the small child clinging to his hand. This tiny 4-year-old girl was the focal point of a dynastic struggle written in blood and suffering. "So he won't stop," Samuel said. It wasn't a question. "No," the captain agreed. "He won't. This was just his first move. When he finds out Jessup failed, he'll send more men, or he'll come himself. My orders are to escort the children to a federal outpost in San Antonio for their safety and testimony." A cold dread washed over the children. Their brief moment of hope vanished, replaced by the familiar mask of fear. "No!" Tommy stepped forward, placing himself between the captain and the other kids. "No more official places. No more outposts. That's how they find you. Blackwood has eyes everywhere. We're not leaving." "Son, I have my orders," the captain began. "Your orders will get them killed," Samuel interrupted, his voice low and firm. He got to his feet, ignoring the agony in his side. The boy's right. Moving them is a mistake. They'd be a target on the open road. Blackwood would be waiting for them. The safest place for them right now is the one place he just failed to take them. "This ranch?" The captain looked around at the small, bullet-riddled house and the modest barn. "Crawford, this place is barely defensible." "It's my home," Samuel said, his eyes hard as iron. "And these are my children. They're not going anywhere." There was a long moment of silence as the captain sized Samuel up. He saw the blood soaking his shirt, the exhaustion in his eyes, but also the unyielding resolve. He saw the 7 children clustered behind Samuel as if he were a stone wall. "My orders are to ensure their safety," the captain said finally, choosing his words carefully. "Right now it seems their safety is with you. I'll leave a detachment of 4 of my best men here. I'll ride back and report that the children were lost in the firefight. It'll buy you some time. But Crawford, you need to understand what you're doing. You're declaring war on a man who owns half of Texas." "He started this war 5 years ago," Samuel said, a cold fire in his eyes. "He just doesn't know it yet." The captain nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. The next few days were a blur of frantic activity. While the 4 cavalrymen set up a perimeter, patrolling the ranch's borders, Samuel and his new family began to transform the quiet homestead into a fortress. It was in this crucible of shared work and purpose that the children finally began to emerge from their shells. Their trauma was deep, a well of darkness Samuel could only guess at, but their resilience was a force of nature. Tommy, at 12, was a natural foreman, directing the other children with a quiet authority that came from having been their sole protector for so long. He and Samuel worked side by side, patching the bullet holes in the house, reinforcing the doors, and boarding up windows, leaving only small slits for firing. Jake and Jim, 9-year-old twins who were mirror images of each other, were tireless workers. They had been forced to haul rock in Blackwood's quarries, and their small bodies possessed a surprising strength. They dug trenches around the house and barn, their movements economical and practiced. It was Sarah, the quiet 10-year-old girl with the hollow eyes, who surprised Samuel the most. She had barely spoken 2 words since arriving, But one evening, as Samuel was trying to sketch a map of the property to plan their defense, she came over and pointed a thin finger at his drawing. "That's wrong," she whispered, her voice rusty from disuse. "The creek bed is deeper there. A man could crawl through it unseen." Samuel stared at her. He'd lived on this land for 6 years and hadn't noticed that detail. He watched as she took a piece of charcoal and, with a few deft strokes, corrected his map. Her knowledge of the terrain was unnerving. "How do you know that?" he asked. "I watch," she said simply. "At the camps, watching was how you stayed alive. You learned the patterns, the guards' routes, the blind spots." She looked up at him, and for the first time her eyes weren't hollow. They were sharp, intelligent. "Mr. Blackwood is a man of patterns, too. He will not send a big army at first. He will send a snake, one man to slip in and finish the job." Samuel felt a chill run down his spine. This 10-year-old girl was thinking like a military strategist. What had this child endured to forge a mind like that? Even little Emma found her role. She had a strange, calming effect on the ranch animals. The chickens, normally skittish, would eat from her hand. The horses would nuzzle her as she whispered to them. She seemed to be in constant, silent conversation with the creatures of the world. As they worked, pieces of their past came out in broken fragments. They spoke of the dark rooms, where children who disobeyed were sent. They talked about the endless work, the meager food, the casual cruelty of the guards. And they always spoke of Blackwood in hushed, terrified tones, as if saying his name too loudly might summon him. One night, as Samuel was cleaning his rifle, Tommy came to him. "You're good at this," the boy said, nodding at the gun. "The fighting. You were a soldier." "A long time ago," Samuel said. "Is that how your family—" Tommy left the question unfinished. Samuel stopped cleaning. He looked out into the darkness. "No, that was a fire. An accident, or so I was told." "There are no accidents around men like Blackwood," Tommy said, his voice low. The boy's words landed like a stone in a still pond, sending ripples back through Samuel's memory. The fire had been ruled an accident, faulty chimney. But he'd always had his doubts. He'd been a ranger before he'd settled down, a man who'd made more than a few enemies. One of them had been a land baron he'd testified against, a man who'd sworn revenge. A man he now remembered with a jolt of ice, who was a known business associate of Ezra Blackwood. He had thought the fire was a random act of fate, a cruel tragedy. But what if it wasn't? What if the destruction of his first family and the arrival of his new one were connected? What if this entire cosmic, cruel circle had started not with a letter from Margaret, but 5 years ago in a storm of smoke and ash? He was so lost in this chilling thought that he almost didn't see it. It was Sarah standing at the darkened window, pointing a single trembling finger into the night. "Someone's out there," she whispered, "by the cottonwoods. He's been watching us for an hour. He moves like a hunter." Samuel grabbed his rifle and peered into the darkness where she was pointing. At first he saw nothing but shadows, but then a flicker of movement. A man dressed in dark clothing, melting back into the trees. Sarah had been right. The snake had arrived. Blackwood hadn't sent an army. He'd sent an assassin, and he was already inside their perimeter. The night became a living thing, full of shadows and menace. Samuel gathered the 4 cavalrymen, their faces grim in the flickering lamplight. "He's inside our patrols," Sergeant Miller, the man in charge, said, his voice tight with frustration. "He must have crawled up that creek bed Sarah mentioned. Damn it, she was right." "He's a professional," Samuel said. "He won't make a direct assault. He'll wait. He'll watch. He'll look for a moment of weakness. His target is the girl, Emma." A plan formed quickly, born of desperation and Samuel's half-forgotten battlefield instincts. They would use their enemy's goal against him. They would set a trap. "We make him think he has his chance," Samuel explained, his voice low. "Tomorrow morning I'll ride out with 2 of your men, heading east. Make it look like we're going for supplies. You two," he said to the remaining soldiers, "stay visible. Patrol the front of the house. Make it look like the place is underguarded." "And the children?" Miller asked. "The children will be the bait." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Tommy, who had been listening from the corner, stepped forward. "We can do it," he said, his young face set with a grim determination. "We know how to act scared." The next morning played out like a tense stage play. Samuel and two soldiers mounted up and rode out, making a show of looking back at the ranch before disappearing over a rise. The two remaining cavalrymen began a lazy, predictable patrol in front of the house. Inside, the children huddled together in the main room, trying to look like a frightened, unprotected flock. But it was all a lie. Samuel and his men hadn't gone for supplies. They had circled around, dismounting a mile away and creeping back on foot through the thick brush, positioning themselves on a ridge overlooking the back of the house. Tommy wasn't with the other children. He was hidden in the hayloft of the barn, Samuel's pistol in his steady hands, watching the back door. Sarah was at a side window, her sharp eyes scanning the fields. Hours passed. The sun beat down. The heat was suffocating. The silence stretched, fraying the nerves. Samuel lay on the ridge, his rifle resting on a rock, sweat stinging his eyes. Had they been wrong? Had the assassin slipped away? Then Sarah gave the signal. A piece of white cloth waved once from the window. She'd spotted him. Samuel scanned the area she had indicated, the thicket of trees behind the house, and then he saw him. The man was a ghost, moving with an impossible stealth from shadow to shadow. He was carrying a long rifle with a spyglass mounted on it, and he was heading not for the house but for the barn. He wasn't going to snatch the girl. He was going to kill her from a distance. But the assassin had made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed the barn was empty. Samuel watched as the man slipped through a side door into the barn's lower level. The trap was sprung. He waited, counting the seconds. He needed the man to get settled, to climb up to the hayloft for a clear shot at the house. He heard a faint creak of wood from inside the barn. Then another. He gave his own signal, a low whistle that carried on the wind. It was the signal for the soldiers at the front of the house to move. Suddenly, a single, sharp crack echoed from the barn, the sound of Samuel's pistol. Tommy. Chaos erupted. The assassin, realizing he'd walked into a trap, burst back out of the barn door, not from the side he'd entered, but from the front, firing wildly back into the hayloft. He was trying to make it to the cover of the woods, but the two cavalrymen were there, cutting off his escape route. Gunfire was exchanged, loud and violent. From his vantage point, Samuel saw the assassin was good, frighteningly good. He moved like a dancer, using every bit of cover, firing with deadly accuracy. One of the soldiers went down, clutching his arm. The assassin was going to escape. Samuel sighted down the barrel of his Winchester. The man was 100 yards away, a moving target, an impossible shot. He let out a slow breath, the way his father had taught him, squeezing the trigger in the silent space between heartbeats. The rifle kicked. The assassin stumbled, spun around, and fell. They approached the body cautiously. He was a wiry man with a face full of scars and the dead eyes of a killer. But it wasn't the man himself that made Samuel's blood run cold. It was the small leather pouch tied to his belt. Inside, there wasn't money. There was a folded piece of paper, a kill order. It listed one name, Emma, and it was signed with a flourish by Ezra Blackwood himself. But there was something else in the pouch, a small, tarnished silver locket. Samuel opened it. On one side was a faded picture of a young, smiling woman. On the other, a picture of a man, a younger, harder-faced version of the cavalry captain who had rescued them. The captain, the man Margaret had trusted, the man who had left 4 soldiers to protect them. "Miller," Samuel called out to the sergeant, "the captain who brought you here. What was his name?" "Harcourt, sir," Miller said, bandaging his wounded comrade's arm. "Captain Thomas Harcourt." Samuel's mind raced. He remembered the look on Harcourt's face when he decided to leave the children at the ranch. It hadn't been understanding. It had been calculation. He hadn't left the soldiers to protect the children. He'd left them as a sacrifice, a way to lull Samuel into a false sense of security while Blackwood's real man, the assassin, moved in. Harcourt was one of Blackwood's men. He had played them all. And the most chilling part? Harcourt knew exactly where they were. He knew their numbers. He knew their defenses. He had probably already reported back to Blackwood that the assassin had failed, which meant the next wave wouldn't be a single snake. It would be an army and it would be led by a man who knew all their secrets. As if on cue, one of the cavalrymen posted as a lookout on the ridge came scrambling down, his face pale with panic. "Riders!" he gasped. "Coming from the north. At least 30 of them. And they're flying a U.S. cavalry flag." Samuel looked at Sergeant Miller, whose face had gone white. "That's Harcourt's company," Miller whispered, his voice full of disbelief and betrayal. "My God, he's not just a traitor. He's bringing the whole damn cavalry down on us." They weren't just fighting bounty hunters anymore. They were about to fight the United States Army itself. Panic was a tangible thing, a spark that threatened to ignite into a full-blown wildfire. The two remaining healthy soldiers looked at Sergeant Miller, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. They were soldiers. They followed orders. And now they were being told that their own captain was the enemy. "He's a traitor!" Samuel's voice cut through the rising tension, sharp and absolute. He held up the locket. "This was on the assassin. Harcourt is working for Blackwood. That flag they're flying is a lie. They are not here to rescue us. They are here to slaughter us and take the girl." He looked at Miller. "Sergeant, you have a choice to make. You can follow the orders of a traitor, or you can stand with us and defend these children." Miller looked from the locket to the approaching dust cloud in the north. He looked at the children who were huddled on the porch, their small faces filled with a new kind of terror. His jaw tightened. He had taken an oath to defend the innocent. He had never imagined that would mean defending them from his own brothers in arms. "My oath is to the United States," he said, his voice hard as stone. "Not to a snake in its uniform. We stand with you, Mr. Crawford." The 30 riders were still miles away, but closing fast. They had maybe 30 minutes to prepare for an assault from a trained, disciplined cavalry unit led by a man who knew their exact position. "We can't hold the house," Samuel said, his mind working furiously. "They'll surround it and pick us apart. Our only chance is to make them come to us, on ground of our choosing." He pointed toward a narrow rocky canyon about a half-mile from the house. "There, the canyon narrows to a choke point. They can't use their numbers against us there. They'll have to come through a few at a time." "It's a bottleneck," Miller agreed, his eyes lighting up with a professional appreciation of the strategy. A classic defensive position. There was no time to pack, no time to gather supplies. They had to move now. "Tommy," Samuel yelled, "get the others. We're leaving. Grab every weapon and all the ammunition you can carry. Jake, Jim, fill as many water skins as you can." The ranch, which they had worked so hard to fortify, was now a trap. They abandoned it in a frantic, desperate exodus, a small band of fugitives, a rancher, 3 soldiers, and 7 children, running for their lives. The wounded soldier, his arm in a sling, grit his teeth and kept pace. They reached the canyon just as the first of Harcourt's riders crested the hill overlooking the ranch. They scrambled into the narrow passage, rocks and boulders providing natural cover. Samuel, Miller, and the other 2 soldiers took up positions, their rifles resting on the rocks, aimed back at the canyon's entrance. "Sarah!" Samuel called. The quiet girl came to his side. "I need your eyes. Get up high, where you can see them but they can't see you. Tell me what they're doing. Tell me how they move." She nodded, and with the agility of a mountain cat, she scaled a rock face, disappearing into the shadows of an overhang. The children, even little Emma, understood the grim reality of the situation. They found cover deep within the canyon, staying silent, making themselves small. Tommy stayed with Samuel, a second rifle in his hands, his face pale but his eyes resolved. They watched as Harcourt's company surrounded the house. They saw them storm the building, kicking in the doors only to find it empty. They saw Captain Harcourt emerge, his face contorted in a mask of rage. He scanned the landscape, his eyes sweeping the area. His gaze paused on the canyon. He knew. They couldn't hear his orders, but they saw the result. A dozen men dismounted, forming a skirmish line at the mouth of the canyon. They began to advance on foot. "Hold your fire," Samuel whispered. "Wait until they're in the bottleneck. Make every shot count." The air was still. The only sound was the crunch of boots on gravel as the soldiers advanced. They were cautious, moving from cover to cover. They were professionals. "They're splitting up," Sarah's voice echoed down from her perch. "A second group is moving along the west rim of the canyon. They're trying to flank us. Miller cursed under his breath. He knows tactics. He's pinning us down with the frontal assault while his flanking party gets above us. They were caught. In minutes, they would have soldiers firing down on them from the canyon rim. There would be no escape. Tommy, Samuel said, his voice urgent, do you know another way out of this canyon? Yes, the boy whispered. There's a game trail. It's steep, but it leads up the east rim, the one they're not on. Miller, Samuel commanded, give me and the boy covering fire. We're going up. We're going to counter their flank. It was a suicidal plan. 2 people, one of them a boy, against a squad of trained soldiers. But it was their only chance. As Miller and his men opened fire on the soldiers in the canyon mouth, sending them diving for cover, Samuel and Tommy scrambled up the steep eastern wall. Rocks crumbled under their boots. Their lungs burned. They clawed their way to the top, emerging from the cover of the rocks, just as Harcourt's flanking party was getting into position on the opposite rim. The soldiers saw them at the same moment. For a heartbeat, everyone froze. Then the air exploded. Samuel and Tommy threw themselves behind a cluster of boulders as bullets ricocheted around them. They were pinned down, exposed on the high rim. But then, something unexpected happened. From deep within the canyon below, a high, piercing whistle echoed. It was a strange bird-like call. On the rim opposite them, one of the soldiers who had been firing at them suddenly stiffened. He looked confused. He lowered his rifle. Another soldier near him did the same. What in the hell? Samuel muttered. Down in the canyon, the whistle came again, more insistent this time. It was a complex, melodic pattern. It wasn't a bird. It was a signal. And then Samuel saw her. It was Emma. The little 4-year-old girl was standing on a rock, her small face turned up toward the soldiers on the rim. She was the one making the call, and the soldiers were responding to it. The other men in Harcourt's flanking party looked at their comrades in confusion, shouting at them. But the 2 soldiers seemed to be in a trance. They turned, and to the astonishment of everyone, they began firing, not at Samuel and Tommy, but at their own men. The flanking party, thrown into chaos and confusion by the sudden betrayal, broke and fell back. Samuel stared, dumbfounded. What just happened? Tommy was staring too, a look of dawning realization on his face. The whistle, he breathed. It was a lullaby, the one her mother used to sing to her, the one she whispers to the horses. He looked at Samuel, his eyes wide. Some of the guards at the camp, they were kind to us. They were prisoners, too, in their own way. Men who had been forced into Blackwood's service. They hated him. They protected us when they could. 2 of them. They were part of the group that was supposed to be shipped to Colorado with us. They must have been reassigned to Harcourt's company. Emma hadn't just been calming horses. Her whispering was a form of communication. Her mother's lullaby was a secret code, a call to arms for those loyal to her memory, hidden right under Blackwood's nose. The children hadn't just escaped. They had allies. They had a secret army. Down below, Captain Harcourt, seeing his flanking maneuver turn into a disaster, let out a roar of fury. His plan had failed. He was losing control, and in his rage he made a fatal error. "Charge them!" they heard him scream. "Full frontal assault! I want Crawford's head!" He spurred his horse forward, leading the charge himself, his sword drawn, a mad gleam in his eyes. He and the remaining mounted soldiers thundered toward the mouth of the canyon. "He's lost his mind," Miller muttered. "He's charging a fortified position." "He doesn't care," Samuel said, sighting down his rifle at the figure of the charging captain. "This isn't about tactics anymore. It's about his pride." Harcourt was a tidal wave of fury, but he was charging directly into a meat grinder. The 4 rifles of the defenders opened up, a steady, disciplined volley of fire. Horses screamed and fell. Men were thrown from their saddles. But Harcourt kept coming. He was a man possessed. He was almost at the canyon entrance when Samuel's rifle barked one last time. The traitorous captain was lifted from his saddle as if by an invisible hand. He hung in the air for a moment, and then crashed to the ground in a heap of blue uniform and shattered honor. The charge broke. The remaining soldiers, their leader dead, lost their nerve. They turned and fled, disappearing back over the hill, leaving their dead and wounded behind. Silence fell over the canyon, broken only by the whimpering of a dying horse. They had survived. They had done the impossible. They had defeated a cavalry company. But as Samuel looked out from the canyon rim at his abandoned, bullet-scarred ranch, he knew this wasn't the end. It was only the end of the beginning. They had killed Blackwood's assassin and his pet captain. They had exposed the corruption within the cavalry, but Ezra Blackwood was still out there. And they had taken something from him far more valuable than workers or money. They had taken his legacy, his blood, his granddaughter. And a man like that would not stop. He would not send more proxies. The next time he would come himself, and he would bring hell with him.